start with a really loaded question. How many of you have ever had a conflict or a disagreement that didn't go quite as well as you'd like? Of course. So it's a good thing that you're here. It would be so much easier if people would just recognize that we are the queen of the world, and all we had to do was take our scepter and say, off with their heads. But we don't really have that opportunity. So I'm going to today share with you 6 keys for dissolving disputes when you can't say off with their heads, which of course we often want to do. How many of you remember the TV show Dragnet? That was one of my favorites. I started watching that when I was a little girl. It was a black and white show. It explains a lot why I love Law and Order SVU and Criminal Intent and all of those shows right now. But I loved that show. And there was Sergeant Friday would go around interviewing people, because this was before the days of DNA testing and all the great tools that they have today. And he would solve crimes by talking to people. He would walk up, I can see him knocking on the doors of the apartments and asking people what they had seen when a crime had occurred. And people would start describing something, and then pretty soon they'd go off into some story that they were making up, and he would stop them and say, "Just the facts, ma'am." Because oftentimes, when things do happen, we only see a part of what happens. It would be similar to that story you may have heard of 3 people looking at an elephant through a fence, through 3 different peepholes in a fence, and each seeing a very different part of the elephant and thinking that they know what an elephant looks like. So usually we only have a piece of the puzzle, but we always think that our piece of the puzzle is the right piece of the puzzle. Or we think it's the only piece of the puzzle, and that's not always the case. I saw a great quote somewhere about a month ago, and it said, "Don't believe everything you think." I love that, because we believe what we think. We have that thought, and we assume it's the truth, and it isn't always. A number of years ago, I worked for Sears, Roebuck & Company. And a woman who was the boss in one of the positions that I had was a very wonderful woman, and we became friends, and so we would go out and socialize and go to the clubs, and this was in Chicago. We would go out together. And we went to one nightclub one Friday evening, and we'd been out earlier during the evening, so when we got there to listen to this live music, it was a little bit late. And so the only seats that they had available were up in the loft. The ceiling was very low, and this was back in the days where non-smokers didn't have any rights and people could smoke wherever they wanted. And sitting in front of us was a big guy who sounded like he'd been there for a long time, enjoying the libations of the establishment. And he was smoking this really fat cigar in this really closed room, and we were starting to get nauseous because the smoke was wafting right toward us. So my friend and boss, Greta, was there whispering in my ear, "What's the matter with him? He's so impolite. Can't he tell? This is rude. He shouldn't be doing that." And finally, I just kind of reached over to him and said, "Excuse me, but that smoke is really thick. Would you mind putting it out?" And he said, "Oh, sure," and he stamped it right out. And most of the time in life, we don't ask for what we want. We make assumptions that people aren't going to give us what we want, that we don't deserve what we want, we don't even think about what it is that we want. So ask for what you want, convert those complaints to requests. I drive pretty aggressively, we'll say. And I have been blessed to have received only a few speeding tickets in my entire driving life. But one day I was living in California, driving up from Sunnyvale, near San Jose, where I lived, up to San Francisco for a meeting, and I was running a little late. So I was flying up Highway 280. It's a very beautiful highway going through the hills. There were the hills on the side, and the fog was rolling in. And the road was pretty empty because it was a Saturday morning and hardly anybody was out. So I'm flying up the highway, and I look back in the rearview mirror, and sure enough, there's some flashing lights. And I thought, oh my gosh, maybe he's not after me. But he pulls up right behind me, flashes his lights, and I thought, oh, I guess I'm caught. So I pulled over, I get a ticket, and I decided to go to one of the all-day traffic schools so that I could get it all over with in one fell swoop. So a few months go by, I go to traffic school, and there are about 40 people in this class. And the instructor starts the class, and she's talking to the class. She has us all introduce ourselves. One of the people in the class was a firefighter. He was a really big, burly guy with a really big, booming voice. And you could just see him rushing into a burning building, picking up bodies, carrying them out, saving lives, and then going to the local tavern and downing a keg of beer. And he was like a big, burly guy. And he talked the whole morning. He interrupted the instructor. He got angry and fought with her about the person who gave him the ticket and what was wrong with them. And for every person in the class who said something, he had either some advice or a suggestion or a comment about it. Now, you know when you're in a room and there's somebody like that and you start to get really irritated, and then pretty soon you notice all the people around you are also getting irritated, their eyes start to roll, and they start groaning. We were at that point. And I was sitting there thinking, I should say something to him. Since I'm a communications expert, I should say something. And I thought, why should I bother? I'm never going to see this guy again. What possible benefit on earth could it be? He probably will take my head off, and I'll be hurt. Why should I do this? But I kept, every time he opened his mouth, I thought, oh my God, I can't stand a whole day of this. So I thought, I'm going to say something to him. So we get to the first break, and I'm about to approach him when I see him walking out with somebody else, giving her his sage advice, I'm sure, on something she had said earlier. And I thought, oh, I'm off the hook. So I turn around to pick up my things, and when I turn back around to leave, he's standing right in front of me. And I thought, I guess I'm not off the hook. So he gives me whatever sage advice he had for me about something that I had shared. And when he finished, I said, you know, I'm glad you came over. And I'm afraid to say this because I don't know how you're going to react. But every time you open your mouth, I get irritated. And then I stood there. And his reaction was, I'm sorry, I get a lot of that. And I thought to myself, I bet you do. And he said, I'll try to be better. And I thought, wow, well, that turned out a lot differently than I expected. Great. So we walked out. We had a really nice conversation over break. We came back in. And after the break was over, the instructor starts talking again. He raised his hand. She called on him. He said 2 sentences and stopped. I was like, wow, that was great. Time goes on. She calls on him again. He raises his hand. She called on him. He said his 2 sentences, put his hand down, stopped talking. One more time. He raised his hand. She didn't call on him right away. He kept his hand up, politely, quietly. She called on him. He said a couple of sentences and stopped. I was like, wow, this is great. One more time, he raised his hand. She, again, didn't call on him right away. And this time, when she does call on him, before he speaks, he turns to me and he says, how am I doing? The whole class turned to me like, you said something to him? And I said, you're doing great. Thank you. I'm proud of you. You're doing fabulous. This is great. So we never know what's going to happen when we make those requests. So start where you are. I was afraid if I said anything, he was going to get angry. So when we do that, it really does kind of take the wind out of their sails and lets them feel where you are so that it's not you attacking them. It's just you expressing what's going on with you. So those are the 6 keys. I hope that you take those keys and open the control room of your life and solve the disputes that are going on.
Thank you.